All right, welcome everyone. This is the August Data and Performance Management Committee meeting. If you haven't already, please enter your name into the chat box so we can see who is participating. And so today we wanted to circle back around on the data accuracy dashboards, as well as talk about the data completeness dashboards. So this came up from some of the feedback we got last time on the data accuracy dashboard. And to really incorporate that feedback, we thought it was best to create a separate dashboard for that. So we'll go over those and then finish up with the street outreach project performance reports. So just to remind everyone, the data accuracy dashboard, the purpose is to ensure that data entered into HMIS reflects accurate client information. And so there are some of the questions that you would ask related to accuracy are on the slide. So has the data been entered into HMIS correctly? Does the data make sense? So this would be like clients should not be enrolled in a project before they're born. So is the date of birth before or on the project start date, that kind of thing. And then also for data accuracy, does the data make sense for the specific project that you're reviewing? So for example, if you know your project has a requirement to serve veterans, are all of the clients in your project veterans? So that's kind of the purpose for the data accuracy dashboard, to make sure what you're seeing makes sense. And so I broke down the dashboard into sections to kind of make it a little bit easier to consume. And then we can talk about any feedback that the group has. So the first section of the dashboard is kind of a project overview. So it's meant to tell you some high-level details about the clients that are in your project. When the dashboard is released, you will be able to pull the dashboard for whatever reporting period you would like, and it will list each of your projects down the left side. So each bar in these charts represents a different project. So the first chart is looking at how many active enrollments were there during the reporting period. The second is looking at the breakdown of those clients by household type. So you can see households with children, without children, with only children, or missing. We also have a breakdown by the age of all of the clients in the project. So you can see 0 to 5 clients, 6 to 17, 8 to 24, 25 to 61, 62 plus and missing. We also have breakdown by gender. We have the number of active veterans in the project and the number of active chronically homeless in the project. So like I said, there's a lot more data, but I wanted to start with this group first and see if anyone has any feedback on these, any if this looks good, or if there's any changes you want to make, or if there's any other data from like a project level standpoint of information that would be helpful to include. We do have, I'll go over entry and exit information later, as well as some other issues, but just focusing on the project overview. Catherine is liking it. Any other feedback? I did not include race and ethnicity in this because I didn't think that was something that a user would typically know off the top of their head. So I didn't think that would be that useful for accuracy. It is included in the data completeness dashboard, which we'll go over a little later, but that's why those aren't on here. All right, I'm not seeing any other feedback, so I'm going to keep going. The next section of the dashboard is specific to entry information. So again, it's all at the project level. And you can see the number of entries that occurred during the reporting period for each of your projects. And then for all clients active in the project, you can see where they're entering from. So you can see homeless situation, institutional, temporary, permanent, and missing is an option, but none of these were missing. So you'll be able to see that breakdown also. Any thoughts on this or anything related to entry information that you would like to be able to see here? All right, I'm going to keep rolling, but if anybody thinks of anything, we can always come back. Next section is exit information. So these charts are fairly similar. The left is looking at the number of exits during your reporting period. And on the right, it's the same number of enrollments, but it's broken down by where they're exiting to. And in this chart, I wanted to make this chart useful for all agencies and all project types. So it's not broken down by successful versus unsuccessful. It's just broken down by types of destinations. So permanent housing is one category, and that is a successful destination for any project. However, for street outreach, for example, homeless sheltered is considered successful. So we broke that out as a separate category. And I think it's also useful for any agency to see where their clients are exiting to, whether it's the homeless sheltered system or potentially the streets. We also have deceased and missing on here. And then I think also temporary and institutional settings, that just didn't apply for this agency I was looking at, but those are also options. Is there any other, and deceased is kind of its own thing because it didn't fall anywhere else. Are there any other types of exits that would be useful to highlight here, or any other exit information? And is this chart on the left necessary, since the same numbers are included here on the right in the gray? I see a chat comment for rapid rehousing. Right now, rapid rehousing is included under the permanent housing exit. Since that's technically what that is. But we could separate that out if that's something that's useful to the group. We got one response to not include this pink chart since we're getting the same information on the right. We got 2 votes for that. Is anybody really attached to this pink chart? All right, I'm not seeing any. And you guys, if you prefer to not put your information in the chat, you can also unmute and ask questions or comments if that's better for you. All right, the next section of the dashboard, this is actually 2 slides, but there was a lot, so I split them. The next sections are looking at potential data quality issues. So The first is looking at, does the client have a date of birth after the project start date? That doesn't make sense. So if there were any, there would be a bar chart here with the number of clients. The next is looking at disabled clients. So they said, yes, I have a disabling condition, but they did not select the type of disability. The third is the opposite. So they did not say they had a disabling condition, but they did report a disability type. Beneath that, we have approximate date homelessness started errors. So these are, so the approximate date homelessness started field should be the date the client's current episode of homelessness began. And so that should be either prior to the project start date or potentially on the project start date if that's the day they became homeless, but it should not be after the project start date. So this is reflecting clients where their homeless start date was after project start. We also have housing move-in date errors. So the housing move-in date is the date the client was placed in a permanent housing unit. So that should be between the project start date and the project exit date. And this chart is looking at if the housing move-in date was before project start or after project exit. So that's this. And then we also have the number of days it takes to place a client in a permanent housing unit for those permanent housing projects. This is just a breakdown of how many days for your project. So this may or may not have data quality issues, but I thought it was helpful to be able to see those numbers because, you know, if you know it's taking normally around 60 days and someone has been over a year that it took them to be placed in a unit, that may be worth looking at because it could be a data entry error. So that's kind of how this one's functioning. And then these next two are related to the prior living situation field. So you may have noticed there's the question, how long has your client been in the prior living situation? So everyone's answering that. But in some cases, there's another question that asks, was the client's length of stay in that prior living situation less than 7 nights? Or was the length of stay in that prior living situation less than 90 days? So these two charts are looking at if that yes, no question matches what you entered for the length of stay field. So if you said, yes, the client was here for less than 7 nights, but for length of stay, you said, you know, 1 year or longer, those don't match. So that's what these two charts are looking at. The next few here on the right, the top one is looking at, does the client have multiple active enrollments in the same project during the reporting period? Unfortunately, we had to do this at the agency level because just the restrictions on Looker, it was hard to do it in this format for each project. So we did it by agency, but there will be a details report so you can see who they are. And then the next two are issues with the head of household. So either there is more than one head of household in a project enrollment during the reporting period, or there was no head of household. So those are here also. And then the last few are also potential data quality issues depending on how your project functions. On the left, it counts the number of enrollments that don't have any services entered at all during their enrollment. So if you know your project requires services to be entered and you're seeing numbers here, then that's something you should look into. The middle chart is looking at if the client does have a service in an enrollment, how long ago did that occur? And there's time ranges down here at the bottom. And again, if you know, every month a client should have case management and that should be entered into HMIS, then all of your clients should fall within 0 to 30 days since their last service. And if that's not the case, you would need to look at those clients. And then the last chart, again, depends on how your project runs. This is just looking at how many days they were in the project. So number of days between the project start date and the project exit date, or the current date if they're not exited. And you can see the date ranges again. And so if you know that you have transitional housing project and everybody should be leaving within, a year or two, but some clients have been enrolled for more than 5 years, that's something you want to look at. So that's kind of how you use this dashboard and how you think about this data. This is the last slide on the data accuracy dashboard. So I wanted to give everyone a couple minutes to think about this. And if this is helpful to you, if there are other things that you would like to be able to see to look at data accuracy, or any feedback you might have. Catherine gives it a yes vote.
I do, and I was actually just typing in the chat that it doesn't feel like a real dashboard without a donut in here, but all joking aside, Erin, this is really, really great. Thanks so much for working on this. It will be so helpful, I know, to us, and I'm sure to a lot of other agencies. So thank you for doing this.
I'm gonna find a way to put a donut in just because you said that.
You have to, because it isn't something that you've worked on without a donut.
Any other feedback from anyone? Okay. Again, if you think of anything else, we can come back to it. Also, if you're just going about your life and you think of something, you could put it in the help desk and we can incorporate it also. This doesn't have to be, the only time we talk about this. So let us know your ideas and we can update accordingly. So the next dashboard that we created was a data completeness dashboard. So this is specifically looking at, is a field filled, yes or no? So that's kind of the difference between the two, and why we also have a data accuracy dashboard, since not only is it important to see that data is entered, but that it's entered correctly. So this dashboard has categories of valid responses, don't know, refused, blank, or data not collected. And then there's a couple that have data issues that I'll get into, but it's mostly looking at valid versus not. And according to HUD, don't know, refused, data not collected, and blank are not valid. And so obviously there's a lot of different types of data in HMIS, which in turn will mean a lot of dashboards. So we have a universal data elements dashboard, which is a lot of client demographic information, and will be run by all agencies because all agencies are required to collect that data. And then there are program-specific data elements at entry and exit, and these are more of the fields that are on the enrollment screen, like the types of disabilities, whether or not they're a victim of domestic violence, income, health insurance, non-cash, that kind of stuff. And when this is done, There will be a entry and exit report for all users to run because there are common program specific data elements that most projects have to collect. So everybody will run these. And then on top of that, there are some projects that are receiving specific funding that requires even more data to be collected. So we will have separate program specific data elements dashboards for HOPWA, VASH, SSVF, RI, and PATH that are field specific to those funding sources. So when this is all said and done, it'll be like a good 12 data completeness dashboards. And so the data completeness dashboard closely reflects what's going on in the data quality report cards that we are publishing on a quarterly basis. And so this is a sample of what it looks like. So you'll have each data element across the top in the title, and then you'll have a bar for each project, and the greenish teal color means that the data entered was valid, a valid response. If the client answered client doesn't know or client refused, it will be in yellow. If the data is missing, it will be in purple. And then for these top three here specifically, name data quality, SSN data quality, and date of birth data quality, there is an option for data issues because according to the HUD guidance, if a client enters like an approximate date of birth or a partial SSN or like a partial name, those are considered data issues by HUD. And so we have included a category for those three, and then for all the rest, it's just valid, don't know, refused, and missing. So like I said, there will be a separate data element, a separate chart for each data element, and it will be for all HUD required fields and all other federal funding required fields. And so I wanted to give the group a chance to review and provide feedback on this. Is this helpful for you? I know we kind of talked about the data accuracy dashboard last time and including all the data elements, but this seemed like a better fit to look at the data, in different ways and go into those details. So any thoughts on this one? Cassie is giving it the thumbs up. And Janine. And Caitlin. And Catherine. All right, anything we can do to make this better for you besides details, which we'll get into in a second? Okay. All right, so as many of you know, what I just showed you is kind of only half of it if you can't actually know who these people are. So that's where the details reports come in. We will be having details reports for all of these. It will include a list of clients with their IDs and their names so that you know who they are and what errors they are causing. But one question I wanted to get feedback on from the group is the format of that. So what we could do, for example, on the data completeness report is we could give you one big chart like this. So it would be an Excel document. It would list the agency name, project name, and then all of the fields that are on the data completeness report. And then you or your other users would have to, do your filtering and figure out where the issues are. The concern with this is it relies on you having a strong understanding of what is required for who. So for example, on this chart, it says income from any source. There will be some blanks on this because children are not required to collect income information. And there is a filter for you to filter on head of households and adults. So you would have to know for income, first I need to filter by adults or head of household and then review the income field to see where the errors are. The other option is to create a details dashboard, which would mean separate spreadsheets, smaller spreadsheets for each field that take into account all that filtering for you in terms of who needs to collect information and who doesn't. And it could tell you, for example, here, the income from any source data, which is also on this longer spreadsheet, but whether or not it's an error. So this one's an error because it says client doesn't know, client, or says client doesn't know. This one is an error because it says data not collected. And then if it wasn't an error, it would be blank or it would say valid or something. So you could just filter on this column to see those that you need to fix. So the benefits of the smaller one is all of the expertise on the data elements themselves and what is required for who is done for you. So you just have to do the filtering. The downside of this smaller one is you'll get a zip file with a separate spreadsheet for each data element. So it's more spreadsheets. The benefit of the bigger one is it's just one spreadsheet with everything on it. But the downside is you have to know the data elements well in order to make this useful for you. So what is the preference of the group on that?
I think most of the administrators would be able to maneuver through the larger report. However, passing these along to folks who are not necessarily as privy to that information or whatnot might be easier if it is broken down for us, which actually just sounds like a bigger task for you guys. So I don't know if anybody else has an opinion on how that. Catherine, I see you unmuted.
I was just going to say, I agree with you that for agency administrators and people who are really comfortable would probably prefer the big report. And I think on the flip side, just our experience in having kind of those separate reports that are broken down where you can only focus on the clients who do have data quality issues. I think that that's helpful, but it can also, the downside to that for people who are consuming that information is that seems really overwhelming, getting 12 potentially different details reports of people who have data quality issues. So I think our preference at FSC would definitely be one big report that then we could look through, we could highlight or color code those things, and then send that out so that we can get those corrections if needed. And we have experience with both and definitely prefer one big report, but can understand the downsides and the positives to both too.
Yeah, the other thing we've come across in the past is, so if we had all of these little reports, so a separate report for each field is, let's say for client one, they have issues with income and non-cash benefits. On the big report, you could see those together at the same time and fix them at the same time. But if you have a separate report for each data element, you would probably make the fix for income and then move on to non-cash benefits and have to come back again to that same client and fix their non-cash benefits. So that's something else we've heard in the past. Let's see, we got it, something in the chat. Personally, like the way it has been with the larger report. Agree with Catherine. The big one is a time saver. We got another vote for the big guy. Anyone really hate the idea of the one big report? Got another vote for the larger one. Okay. That makes it easier for us. So I don't have a problem with it. Would it be beneficial to include like filtering instructions, or do you guys feel like you know what you're doing on these?
I feel like we are pretty comfortable and understand what we're doing, but the reason why I think it might be good to include those instructions is in case there is turnover at an agency, then whoever is coming in, may or may not even get training before someone leaves, and would be able to have those instructions and sort through that data.
Okay. Got a couple more votes for instructions, especially for new hires and training. Okay. All right. So the goal is for all of these reports to be available by the next user meeting, which is early September. And most of them, at least on the aggregate level side, are ready. So those should be available. We still obviously have to do some work on the details side and some of the other federal funding sources, but the goal is to get those done and out to you guys next month. And once you start using them, if you come across anything and it's not, working the way you thought it would, or something like that, you can always submit a ticket and we can work with you on changes if that makes sense. And yeah, hopefully these will be helpful for you guys. So we're probably going to end a little early today, but I still have the street outreach project performance reports to talk about. All right. So as usual, we do have the project level performance for each of the measures for street outreach. The 4 measures are entries from homelessness, decreasing length of stay in street outreach projects, exiting clients to successful housing situations, and ensuring that once clients exit to permanent housing, they are not returning to homelessness. And throughout the reports, the purple means the project or the project type met the threshold, and the pink means that the threshold was not met. So feel free, if you haven't already, please look at that for your projects. And then the goals and outcomes report is looking at the performance of street outreach as a whole in our COC. So the first page is looking at the 4 measures and how street outreach projects did overall. We're staying steady on our entries from literal homelessness. I would like to see this get to 100%, since for street outreach, if you're engaging a client in street outreach, that client should be literally homeless. But in a minute, we can look at where those other entries are coming from. We've actually decreased length of stay and street outreach projects, which is great. And we are now meeting that measure, which is 65 days or less. We've had a little bit of a dip in exits to successful housing situations, but we are still well over our threshold for this measure. And we have improved on the percentage of clients that are returning to homelessness. Only 2% of clients returned. And our threshold, we're again well under that threshold. It should be less than 12%. So we're doing great there. Okay, so entries from homelessness. Again, you can look across the top and see the percentage of entries from homelessness for the project type as well as different subpopulations. And then in our donut here, you can see for those not entering from homelessness, where they're coming from. And the majority of clients, that information is missing. So to me, that's kind of a lost opportunity to boost up this measure a little bit, because for usually in street outreach, you know, they are homeless. So does anyone have experience or thoughts on why this information may be missing?
Yes.
Yes, Cassie, tell us.
Because a lot of times our clients aren't really like engaged clients, and they don't want to answer any questions. So I think even though they're being seen on the streets, a lot of these, even the ones that we do intakes with and get that information, I think a lot of times it's like, you know, yeah, I've been staying in an emergency shelter, but I'm out during the day, you know, and or like, oh, I'm couch surfing, but they're still seemingly like homeless during the day, so they're being encountered by staff. So I want to say that other, you know, portion where they're not, you know, where we're missing information is because they're, you know, we're lucky if we get a name out of them. But we do offer them services, so we are capturing that information.
So for, because you get like ESG funding.
Oh, yeah, you should see my capers right now. It's real fun.
Don't they require them to like certify in some way that they're homeless?
Well, we so we have a couple ESG funded projects. The CCRT one is ESG funded, and we were thankfully at 100%. The Anaheim ESG, which was before that, I think we had a pretty high percentage as well. But I don't know, it's kind of one of those things. I mean, we have Garden Grove as well, and I think that's been a little bit of a struggle, but like, it's very, very difficult when we have, we're trying to kind of play by HMIS rules and enter all the information. Even if we don't get the information, we're still entering the clients because we've offered them services. And then on the back end, it's like, well, you know, yeah, we're kind of like messing up our data. This is kind of what I was afraid of, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, like I said, our capers are pretty interesting, since we have changed the way we've been doing HMIS and the way that, I mean, I feel like we were kind of like fudging the numbers a little bit before, when we were only entering people who were 100% willing to work with us, and, you know, and not entering every single person that we actually, you know, came in contact with and tried to speak to and had contact with and had conversations with, but still refused to give us their information. So yeah, it's definitely hurt us. but at least it's real. But yeah, getting back to your question about ESG, I mean, I really don't know what to do about that. It's a very small percentage, I want to say, for those programs specifically. But yeah, I don't know. I know we don't have a ton of other agencies that do outreach, and I don't know if any of them are really on this call right now, but you know, I don't know. I really just don't know what to do.
It has picked up though. If you look at we've got a lot more. It's still not many agencies. It's kind of a lot of projects,
A lot of projects,
few
yeah.
agencies, but
Yeah.
it's picking up. For the data collection part, you're talking about how clients don't want to engage and provide information. So what does that look like for those you do kind of engage? Do you just keep going back to the same fields every time you talk to them and say, hey, you didn't provide this last time. Do you want to, are you willing to do that now? Or is it just the one time you ask?
So like if somebody is willing to build rapport with us, we will leave them open, or you know, we'll have maybe a couple of different enrollments with the same person if it's been a while between the time that we are seeing them. But you know, building rapport with them is a big deal, and really our main goal is to get them off the street and into shelter. So I think that's usually when they start actually talking about shelter, then they will complete the intake with them, and they'll fill in that date, you know, basically saying like, I'm willing to accept help and get off the street. So, and then, you know, usually within a day or two, we can get them a bed.
Okay. Any other comments or thoughts on this measure before we move on? All right. So our next measure is looking at the length of time that clients are enrolled in street outreach projects. Our threshold is 65 days or less. And you can see across the different subpopulations. I was interested to see that veterans were a bit longer than everybody else. I don't know if we have any veteran street outreach on the call that can speak to that, or if Cassie, if CityNet interacts with a lot of veterans.
I wouldn't know that off the top, but you know, I don't think that I see a ton of veteran data coming out of our agency. But again, I don't know off the top of my head what other agencies are doing outreach either. So I don't know if they're specifically engaging like a certain demographic or
yeah, it doesn't look like there's any specific veteran projects that were included.
Yeah.
So
not a clue.
I'm gonna find these clients and then ask people.
That's fine. If there are clients, like we can look into it, but I'm not too sure.
The good news is we had a large percentage of clients meet our threshold of 65 days for less. This is about 70% of the clients included met the threshold, so that's great. And then you can see the breakdown for those more than 65 days.
And this doesn't necessarily mean that they've like exited to like any positive destination.
Right. Yes, this is just length of stay.
Yeah, I was gonna say, because this could also be, you know, heavily because of the fact that we have both implemented, you know, well, now we have like a full-blown data team that are keeping up with, you know, making sure that we're exiting people if we haven't been in contact with them, but also like, both reasons, whether that's that we encounter somebody and exit them kind of right away or within, a couple days, or that like we've lost touch with them. Like it's not necessarily positive exits, but yay us for doing that.
Well, that is a good segue into the next one. The exits to successful destinations is still well above our threshold. So I think what you're doing is a positive thing overall. Yeah, you may be struggling a little bit on the entry side, but I think on the length of stay and the exits in general, I think it's doing okay. So you can see the threshold's 15%. We're currently at 35 and even higher for some of the other subpopulations. Households with only children, I expect that these children are mostly part of households with children households, and there's a data entry error in how it's being counted in HMIS, like they're not appropriately linked with their household. So I think that's what's happening here. And it's a small number. So that is my guess on what's happening there. So in our charts here, you can see where these clients are exiting to. So the majority are exiting to successful situations that are not permanent housing. So this can be emergency shelter, transitional housing, just about any situation that's not homelessness on the streets, jail, or missing destinations. That's pretty much everything else is a successful situation. And then there's a few that are exiting straight to permanent housing. And then for those not exiting to successful situations, not surprisingly, the majority have missing data, usually because, like Cassie was saying, clients disappear, and because of that, you don't have that information. So you have to report that as missing. There were a good chunk that exited to street homelessness, and then only a couple that exited to jail or prison. Any comments or questions on this one?
Yeah, don't we have a TAY program, an outreach program on here too now?
We do. So that's a couple of them, but they're pretty new.
I'm sure this is totally our staff. I've caught a lot of them, so
yeah.
Clearly not enough.
The TAY one I think was active in the reporting period for like a month, maybe.
Okay, so it's us probably.
No need to call yourself out, Cassie.
Hey, I'm just being upfront and honest about things and trying to get a hold of getting staff trained on and family things. I find a lot of like the head of household's been exited, and then there's just kids that are just like wandering out there in like HMIS land. I'm like, what are you guys thinking? Like it literally like walks you through all of the exits. I don't get it.
Yeah. I know what you mean. Hopefully the data accuracy dashboard will help with that. All right. And our last measure is looking at street outreach clients that exited straight to permanent housing and then later returned to the homeless system. So we had very few clients that exited to permanent housing in the first place, and then even fewer that later returned to homelessness. And so you can see the percentages again by the different household types. In our little donut that's just a circle with a hole in it, everybody that exited to permanent housing and then later returned to a street outreach project. And this could be related to coordinated entry. A lot of clients come through street outreach to get through the coordinated entry process. So that is likely why they all came back to street outreach. And then for those that did exit to permanent housing before returning, these were where they exited to initially. So 2 of them went to either family or friends that they said was permanent. One owned or rented without a subsidy, and the other one was with a subsidy. Any questions, comments on this one? All right. Well, that was all I had for today. So I will stay on a minute in case anybody has any last minute questions or comments. Other than that, we'll be wrapping up the meeting. We will send out meeting minutes from this meeting, as well as the recording and the slides. And the next meeting will be on September 9th at 1:30, and the agenda will be shared at the user meeting prior, as well as an email will go out with that agenda. So, and if you haven't already, please enter your agency name in the chat box so we know who's participating, and I will hang out for a minute. All right, I'm not seeing anything coming in, so I'm gonna end the meeting. So thank you so much for attending, and we will talk to you guys next time.